At New York's most lavish gala, social currency is everything, and Emma Hayes is bankrupt. She's a ghost haunting the new life of her ex-husband, a man who flaunts his new wife and his success while the elite world they command treats Emma with icy contempt. Every condescending smile and cruel whisper is designed to remind her that she is nothing. But what they fail to realize is that the quietest woman in the room has the most powerful secret, and the city's most feared billionaire is about to step from the shadows and burn their shallow world to the ground. The chandeliers of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Great Hall dripped light like frozen waterfalls, splashing across a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos. This was the annual Metropolitan Legacy Gala, the undisputed pinnacle of New York City's philanthropic calendar, an event where fortunes were pledged on a whim and dynasties were forged over champagne. And in the heart of it all, Emma Hayes felt like a ghost. It wasn't her dress. The gown, a deep sapphire silk that she'd found in a vintage boutique, was a masterpiece of understated elegance. It clung to her frame with a quiet confidence she didn't feel, its simplicity a stark contrast to the jewel-encrusted, feather-adorned creations that flitted past her. It wasn't that she didn't belong. The invitation had come courtesy of the Small Arts Foundation she now ran, a passion project born from the ashes of her old life. A project that had earned a surprise grant and, with it, this single coveted ticket. No, the reason Emma felt invisible was standing 20 feet away, bathed in the flash of a dozen cameras. Richard Sterling, her ex-husband, and on his arm, dripping in so many Cartier diamonds she practically chimed when she moved, was Isabella Vargas, his new wife. Emma's breath hitched. She hadn't known they would be here, though she supposed she should have. Richard, with his cutthroat ambition and newly acquired seat on the board of Sterling and Finch, had always craved this world. He had climbed the ladder of Wall Street with a ruthless efficiency, and Isabella, a model with an impressive trust fund and a more impressive Instagram following, was the perfect accessory for his ascent. She remembered a time when she had been that accessory. She'd stood by his side at countless dinners and fundraisers, her own career in art curation put on hold to support his. She had hosted his partners, charmed his bosses, and edited his speeches, all while believing they were building a life together. Then one Tuesday morning, over a cold cup of coffee, he had announced their life was no longer a viable investment. He had outgrown their marriage, he'd said, his voice devoid of the emotion she had once mistaken for love. The divorce had been swift, quiet, and brutal. He'd kept the sprawling Park Avenue apartment. She'd kept her dignity and her maiden name. Now watching him, she saw the same practiced smile he used to give her, the one that never quite reached his eyes. He laughed at something Isabella whispered in his ear, his hand possessively on the small of her back. They were the sun, and everyone else was a planet caught in their orbit. A circle of socialites, investors, and city council members surrounded them, all vying for a moment of their golden attention. Emma took a steadying sip of her champagne, the bubbles fizzing uselessly on her tongue. Her mission tonight was simple: find Mr. Beaumont, the elderly benefactor who had funded her foundation, thank him profusely, and then disappear back into the quiet comfort of her Brooklyn apartment. It was a simple plan, but it required navigating this shark-infested water. She began to move along the periphery of the Great Hall, her eyes scanning the crowd. She offered polite smiles to the few familiar faces she saw, the ones from her old life. Some returned the gesture with a flicker of pity in their eyes before turning away, a clear signal that allegiance had been sworn to the Sterling Empire. Others, like the formidable Beatrice Davenport, simply looked straight through her, her gaze as cold and hard as the marble statues flanking the entrance. The message was clear. In the divorce of a power couple, society, too, chooses a side. Emma was on the losing one. "Emma, is that you?" The voice was kind, a welcome lifeboat in the icy ocean. She turned to see Ben Carter, an old friend from her university days who was now a rising journalist for Forbes. His tie was slightly askew, and his smile was genuine. "Ben! My God, it's good to see a friendly face," she breathed, a real smile finally gracing her lips. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said, giving her a warm hug. "You look incredible, understated, classy, a rare commodity in this room." His eyes flicked pointedly towards Isabella's glittering entourage. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a brightness into her tone. "Just here for the foundation, trying to hunt down Mr. Beaumont." "Ah, the great white whale," Ben chuckled. "Good luck. I'm here trying to get a quote from the man of the hour." He nodded towards the far end of the hall, where a knot of people was even thicker and more frenzied than the one around her ex-husband. "Damon Lockhart is here." Emma's eyes followed his gaze. She knew the name, of course. Everyone did. Damon Lockhart was less a man and more a myth. The reclusive tech billionaire behind Lockhart Industries, he had revolutionized data security and, in the process, amassed a fortune that dwarfed nearly everyone else in the room combined. He rarely made public appearances, and when he did, he never gave interviews. His presence was the reason for the palpable buzz of energy in the hall. "Don't think you'll have much luck," Emma said. "I hear he's practically a phantom." "A girl can dream," Ben said with a wink. "Listen, it's great to see you, Ames. Truly. Don't let these peacocks get to you. You're worth 10 of them." He gave her hand a comforting squeeze before being pulled away by his editor. His kindness was a small balm on a festering wound. Bolstered, Emma straightened her shoulders and continued her search. She finally spotted Mr. Beaumont near the grand staircase, holding court with a group of equally venerable gentlemen. Steeling herself, she began to make her way through the throng. But her path took her directly into Richard and Isabella's gravitational pull. She tried to sidle past, hoping to remain unnoticed. But Isabella's sharp, calculating eyes snagged on her. The model's smile was a slash of crimson lipstick. "Well, well," Isabella's voice was honey-sweet but laced with venom. "Look what the cat dragged in. Richard, darling, you'll never guess who's here." Richard turned, his polished facade faltering for a fraction of a second as he saw Emma. A flicker of something, annoyance, guilt, crossed his face before being replaced by a cool, dismissive mask. "Emma," he said, his tone flat, as if greeting a distant, slightly embarrassing acquaintance. "I wasn't aware your little charity qualified for a seat at this table." The circle around them fell silent, all eyes turning to watch the unfolding drama. Emma felt a hot flush creep up her neck. The ghost was finally being acknowledged, but only to be exorcised. "It's a foundation, Richard," she replied, her voice steady despite the frantic hammering of her heart. "And we were fortunate enough to receive the Beaumont grant this year." Isabella let out a tinkling, artificial laugh. "The Beaumont grant? Oh, that's adorable. It's for struggling artists, isn't it? How quaint." She ran a hand down Richard's arm, her diamonds flashing like weapons. "Richard is a patron of the museum itself. He just endowed the new contemporary wing, but I'm sure your little grant is very important too." The condescension was suffocating. Every word was designed to remind Emma of her place, of how far she had fallen while they had soared. She felt the stares of the onlookers, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and smug satisfaction. She was the evening's entertainment, the cautionary tale, the ex-wife who couldn't let go. She could only stand there, trapped in the spotlight of their cruelty, the clinking of champagne glasses and the murmur of the crowd fading into a dull roar in her ears. Her simple plan had shattered. All she wanted now was to disappear. The silence that followed Isabella's pronouncement was heavier than any sound. It was a thick, cloying thing, pressing in on Emma from all sides. In that moment, she was no longer a foundation director or a guest. She was a specimen under a microscope, every inch of her vintage dress and her quiet composure being judged against Isabella's blinding brand-new brilliance. Richard, ever the master of plausible deniability, simply smiled a thin, bloodless smile. He wouldn't stoop to insulting her directly. He had Isabella for that. His silence was his endorsement of his new wife's cruelty. It was a calculated display of power, showing everyone in their circle that he was so far beyond Emma now that her presence was nothing more than a minor, amusing irritant. "It was lovely seeing you both," Emma said, her voice a marvel of control. She gave a tight, polite nod and tried to turn away, to resume her mission, to find any escape from this suffocating circle. But Isabella hadn't finished. "Oh, don't rush off," she purred, taking a deliberate step forward, blocking Emma's path. "Tell me, Emma, who are you wearing?" She let her eyes rake over Emma's sapphire gown with theatrical disdain. I don't recognize the designer. Is it last season? The question was a classic power play in this world, a way to measure worth by a label. Emma knew her dress had no famous name attached to it, only the quiet history of a woman who might have worn it to a gala 50 years ago. Its value was in its story, not its price tag. But that was a language Isabella didn't speak. It's vintage, Emma said simply. Vintage, Isabella repeated the word as if it were a communicable disease. She leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was intentionally loud enough for everyone to hear. That's a brave choice. Most people try to look like they're moving forward, not backward. But I suppose when you have nothing new in your life, you have to cling to the past. The barb hit its mark. It wasn't just about the dress anymore. It was about her life, her divorce, her perceived failure. A few people in the circle tittered nervously. The humiliation was a physical thing now, a hot poker pressing against her sternum. She could feel her composure beginning to crack, the careful walls she had built around her heart starting to crumble. She looked at Richard, a silent plea in her eyes. Stop this, please. For a moment she saw a flicker of the man she had once loved, a shadow of discomfort in his gaze. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the cool indifference of a stranger. He gave a slight shake of his head, a clear signal that he would not intervene. He had made his choice. This was his new kingdom, and she was an unwelcome intruder. If you'll excuse me, Emma said, her voice barely a whisper. She finally pushed past Isabella, not caring about the faux gasp of offense the model gave. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She walked, her head held high, though she felt like she was wading through tar. The whispers followed her, slithering across the marble floor like snakes. So embarrassing, just showing up like that. Her Richard looked so much happier now. Did you see her dress? She looked so provincial. Each whisper was a small cut, bleeding her of the little confidence she had managed to muster. She abandoned her search for Mr. Beaumont. The foundation would have to survive without her personal thanks tonight. All she wanted was the exit. She scanned the room, her vision blurring slightly, and saw the grand doors that led to the cool night air. Freedom. As she made her way toward them, a waiter with a tray of hors d'oeuvres stepped backward into her path without looking. Emma sidestepped to avoid a collision, stumbling slightly. A hand shot out and gripped her elbow, steadying her. Careful there, a low, amused voice said. She looked up and found herself staring into the face of Harrison Croft, a notoriously sleazy hedge fund manager and one of Richard's closest friends. He had always made her skin crawl. His eyes, small and piggy, roamed over her with an oily appraisal. Emma Hayes, he drawled, not releasing her arm. Didn't expect to see you here? Flying solo tonight? I'm here on business, Harrison, she said, trying to pull her arm away. His grip tightened. Business, right? Your little art thing, he sneered. Listen, Richard's a fool. He traded a classic for a new model that'll be outdated in a year. If you're looking for some sponsorship, maybe we can have a drink later. Talk about your foundation. The insinuation was vile, unmistakable. He was treating her like she was for sale. The final, crushing indignity of the night. All the air went out of her lungs. The room began to spin, the glittering lights of the chandeliers blurring into painful, star-like bursts. This was it. This was the moment she broke. Let go of me, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and despair. Don't be like that, Emma, he said, his thumb stroking the inside of her elbow. I'm just trying to be friendly. She was trapped, cornered by her ex-husband's lecherous friend, publicly humiliated by his new wife, and utterly, completely alone. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she fought them back with every ounce of her will. She would not cry, not here, not in front of them. She finally wrenched her arm free, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Go to hell, Harrison, she spat, her voice low and shaky. She turned and fled, pushing through the crowd, ignoring the curious and disdainful looks she received. She didn't stop until she reached the relative anonymity of a shadowy alcove behind a massive marble column. Leaning against the cool stone, she closed her eyes, trying to breathe. The magnificent hall, once a symbol of opportunity, now felt like a prison. The opulent beauty of her surroundings was a mockery of the ugliness she had just endured. She had been a fool to come, a fool to think she could exist in Richard's world on her own terms. They had made it painfully clear that without him, she was nothing. Just an ex-wife, a piece of history, a ghost clinging to a life that was no longer hers. From his vantage point on the mezzanine balcony, Damon Lockhart had an unobstructed view of the entire glittering spectacle. He leaned against the balustrade, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, a solitary figure cloaked in the shadows in the impeccable tailoring of a Tom Ford tuxedo. He was a king observing his court, though he felt no kinship with the preening, posturing subjects below. He hated these events. He saw them as a necessary evil, a ritual he had to perform a few times a year to appease his board and remind the world that Lockhart Industries was not just a faceless corporation, but a dominant, tangible force. He moved through the world like a shark, silent and purposeful, and these galas were the equivalent of being forced to swim in a shallow, decorative pond with goldfish. His gaze swept across the hall, dissecting the crowd with a cool, analytical precision. He saw the hierarchies, the power plays, the desperate hunger for recognition in the eyes of men who had everything and still felt they had nothing. He saw Beatrice Davenport cutting down a rival with a single venomous glare. He saw a young senator fawning over an ancient oil baron. And he saw Richard Sterling, a man he knew by reputation, a rising star at Sterling and Finch. An institution Lockhart Industries was currently in the process of acquiring in a silent, hostile takeover. Damon's assessment of Sterling was brief and brutal, ambitious, slick, and utterly hollow. A man who mistook arrogance for strength. He watched Sterling and his garish wife hold court, and he was unimpressed. They were a cliché, a perfect embodiment of new money, desperate to be seen as old. Then his eyes found Emma. She was an anomaly. In a room screaming for attention, she was a whisper. There was a quiet grace about her, a self-possessed stillness that was more compelling than all of Isabella's manufactured glamour. He watched as she navigated the room, noting the subtle slights, the turnbacks, the way the circles of conversation seemed to magically close as she approached. He saw it all. He had noticed her the moment she walked in. The sapphire dress had caught his eye first, not for its brand, but for its color, a deep, defiant blue in a sea of predictable black and metallic. And then he'd seen her face. There was a story there, in the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes and the resolute set of her jaw. It was a face that had known disappointment, but had refused to be defeated by it. His gaze remained fixed on her as she approached Richard Sterling's group. Damon's hearing was sharp, and from his perch, he could just make out the cadence of the conversation. He didn't need to hear the exact words. He could read the scene in the tightening of Emma's shoulders, the smug, predatory smile on Isabella's face, and Richard's cowardly inaction. He watched as Isabella leaned in, her voice a poisonous dart, and saw the way Emma flinched, as if struck by a physical blow. A muscle in Damon's jaw tightened. He despised bullies. He'd spent his life fighting them, from the playgrounds of his bleak childhood to the cutthroat boardrooms of his adulthood. He recognized the particular brand of casual cruelty wielded by the insecure and the privileged, and it ignited a cold, controlled fury within him. He continued to watch as Emma made her escape, his eyes following her until she was accosted by Harrison Croft. Damon knew Croft too, a bottom feeder who got rich on other people's misery. He saw the man's hand on Emma's arm, the leering look on his face, the way her body went rigid with revulsion. And in that moment, a decision that had been hovering in the back of his mind for weeks solidified into an unshakable resolve. He had been patient. He had been waiting for the right moment, the right stage. He'd thought perhaps a quiet press release or a carefully managed announcement was the way to do it. But watching this raw public humiliation, he realized that subtlety was an indulgence he could no longer afford. Some statements needed to be made with the force of a thunderclap, not the whisper of a breeze. He straightened up, placing his untouched whiskey on a passing waiter's tray. His movements were fluid and deliberate, devoid of any wasted motion. His personal security chief, a formidable man named Peterson, who was never more than 10 feet away, materialized at his side. "Sir?" Peterson asked, his voice a low rumble. "I'm going downstairs, Peterson," Damon said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel. "Have the car brought to the front. We'll be leaving shortly." "And Mrs. Lockhart, sir?" Peterson asked, his expression impassive. It was the name they had used in private for months, a fact known to only a handful of the most trusted people in Damon's inner circle. Damon's gaze found the alcove where Emma was hiding, a lone figure trying to piece her shattered composure back together. "Yes," Damon said, a strange protective fire in his eyes. "Mrs. Lockhart will be coming with me." He descended the grand staircase, not with the hurried pace of a rescuer, but with the measured, inexorable tread of a king descending into his court to restore order. People turned as he passed, a wave of whispers and murmurs following in his wake. The phantom was moving among them. No one dared approach him. His aura of untouchable power was a palpable force field. He ignored them all. His focus was singular, his destination absolute. He was not just going to end Emma's humiliation, he was going to annihilate it. He was going to rewrite her story in front of the very people who had tried to erase her. And he was going to do it on his own terms, at the center of their stage. As Damon reached the bottom of the staircase, the gala's host, Genevieve Atherton, a woman whose social influence was as old and solid as her family's fortune, was stepping up to the microphone on the central dais. Her voice, amplified by the speakers, commanded the room's attention. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," she began, her smile radiant. "As we celebrate another year of giving, it's important to recognize the pillars of our community, the individuals whose vision and generosity make nights like this possible." The crowd quieted, their conversations tapering off into an expectant hush. This was a familiar part of the program, a moment to flatter the big donors. Genevieve was about to launch into a tribute to the gala's main benefactor when she saw Damon Lockhart walking toward the dais with an unwavering purpose. Her eyes widened in surprise. She, like everyone else, knew of his aversion to the spotlight. Without breaking stride, Damon stepped onto the low stage, moving to the second microphone. He gave Genevieve a brief, almost imperceptible nod, a silent request to which she could only acquiesce. A current of shock and intrigue jolted through the audience. Damon Lockhart was going to speak. Phones were raised surreptitiously, recording the unthinkable. Richard and Isabella, who had been basking in the glow of their social victory, turned to stare, their expressions a mixture of awe and confusion. What was the most powerful man in the room doing? Damon stood before the microphone, his presence commanding the vast hall into absolute silence. He didn't clear his throat or shuffle any notes. He simply waited a beat, letting the weight of the moment settle over them all. His eyes, a piercing shade of gray, scanned the sea of faces until they found the alcove where Emma was still hidden, trying to make herself small. He looked directly at her, though no one else knew the target of his gaze. "Good evening," he began, his voice deep and resonant, carrying to every corner of the hall without any hint of strain. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being heard, a man who never had to raise it. Genevieve speaks of legacy, of vision. It's a popular topic at events like this. We talk about the legacies we build with steel and glass, with stock portfolios and endowments. We put our names on buildings, hoping for a sliver of immortality. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. But a legacy built on vanity is fragile. It can be shattered in an instant. Real legacy isn't about what you own or whose name you know. It's about integrity. It's about the quiet, unseen choices you make when no one is watching. It's about having the strength to stand for what is right, even when you are standing alone. His gaze intensified, boring across the room toward Emma. He saw her peek out from behind the column, her face pale, her eyes wide with confusion. She thought he was just giving a speech, a generic platitude like all the others. She had no idea he was speaking directly to her. Across the room, Richard Sterling shifted uncomfortably. Damon's words felt unexpectedly sharp, like shards of glass aimed in his direction. Isabella, however, was merely annoyed by the delay in the festivities, tapping her foot impatiently. "I've spent my life building an empire," Damon continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal, drawing the entire room in. "And for a long time I thought that was the only legacy that mattered. I was wrong. The greatest fortune I have ever acquired, the single most important part of my life, is not a company or a patent. He lifted his gaze from Emma and swept it over the crowd, over the faces of the powerful, the wealthy, the cruel, and the dismissive. He let them see the cold fire in his eyes. My legacy, he declared, his voice ringing with unshakable authority, is the partnership I share with a person of unparalleled grace, intelligence, and moral fortitude. A person who taught me the meaning of strength not by commanding attention, but by persevering in silence. He took a half step forward, his hand gripping the microphone stand. The final, devastating blow was coming. And so, I want to end the speculation that has followed me for years. I am not here alone tonight, and I haven't been for a very long time. I am here to support the incredible philanthropic work of the woman I love, the woman who is the heart of my life. He paused, his eyes finding Emma again, and this time he smiled. It was a small, private smile, meant only for her, but it was broadcast on the giant screens flanking the stage for all to see. And so it is my distinct honor and my profound privilege, he said, his voice dropping the bombshell that would shatter the foundations of their social world, to introduce you to my wife, Emma Lockhart. For a full 3 seconds, there was nothing. Just the stunned, echoing silence of 1,000 people simultaneously processing the impossible. The name Emma was a lightning bolt, then chaos. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Whispers turned into frantic, disbelieving murmurs. Every single head swiveled, following Damon's gaze, searching until they all landed on the same target. The woman in the simple blue dress, the ghost in the alcove, the irrelevant ex-wife. Emma stood frozen, her hand flying to her mouth. The world had tilted on its axis. The sound of a champagne flute shattering on the marble floor somewhere nearby was the only thing that broke the spell. The most visceral reaction came from Richard and Isabella. Isabella's jaw had literally dropped, her crimson smile frozen in a grotesque mask of shock. Richard had gone white as a sheet, his eyes wide with a dawning horror and disbelief. He stared at Emma, then at Damon Lockhart on the stage, then back at Emma, his mind refusing to connect the two. Emma? His Emma? With Damon Lockhart? It was impossible. It was a nightmare. But the nightmare was just beginning. The silence was a fragile pane of glass, and Damon's final word had shattered it into a million pieces. The ensuing noise was a tidal wave of murmurs, gasps, and the frantic clicking of phone cameras. The press, who had been cordoned off near the entrance, surged against the velvet ropes, their lenses aimed like rifles at the woman in the blue dress. Emma felt the full force of 1,000 pairs of eyes landing on her. The weight of it was immense, a physical pressure that stole her breath. She was no longer a ghost. She was the most solid, most scrutinized person in the universe. Her face, broadcast on the giant screens, was a portrait of pure shock. On stage, Damon remained perfectly calm. His work was done. He gave another slight nod to the stunned Genevieve Atherton, turned away from the microphone, and descended the dais steps. He did not look at the clamoring press or the gaping socialites. He moved through the crowd as if parting the Red Sea, his eyes locked on only one person. As he approached, people scrambled out of his way. The same individuals who had looked through Emma moments before now stared at her with a new, feverish intensity, their minds racing to recalibrate her status. She was not the forgotten ex-wife. She was the secret queen. He reached her alcove. He stopped a foot in front of her, his expression softening as he took in her pale, bewildered face. The roar of the crowd seemed to fade into a distant hum. "Damon," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" "I told them the truth," he said simply, his voice a low, reassuring rumble meant only for her. He extended his hand. "Are you ready to leave?" She stared at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. This was real. This was happening. Numbly, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, an anchor in the swirling vortex of her reality. He laced his fingers through hers and turned, leading her out of the shadows and into the brilliant, chaotic light. The moment they stepped forward together, a fresh wave of pandemonium erupted. The flash of cameras was a blinding, strobing strobe light. Questions were being shouted from all directions. Mr. Lockhart, when were you married? Mrs. Lockhart, why the secrecy? Emma, what do you have to say to your ex-husband? Damon ignored them all, his body positioned slightly in front of Emma's, shielding her from the worst of the onslaught. Peterson, his security chief, appeared as if from nowhere, clearing a path through the throng with two other plainclothed guards. Emma caught a glimpse of Richard and Isabella as they were swept past. Isabella's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and disbelief. Her perfectly constructed world had been demolished. She had built her identity on being the woman who had won, who had snagged the successful Richard Sterling. But she hadn't just been upstaged, she had been rendered utterly insignificant. The woman she had mocked and belittled was married to a man whose net worth could buy and sell Richard's company 100 times over without noticing the expense. Richard's expression was even more devastating. It was a cocktail of horror, regret, and the sickening, dawning realization of the magnitude of his mistake. He wasn't just looking at his ex-wife, he was looking at the living embodiment of the greatest miscalculation of his life. He had discarded a lottery ticket that had turned out to be the winning billion-dollar prize. He had traded a diamond for a piece of glass. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow. His social ascent had just hit a granite ceiling. In snubbing Emma, he had unknowingly snubbed the wife of Damon Lockhart. In the brutal calculus of this world, he was finished. Damon led Emma through the great hall, past the frozen statues and the stunned faces, and out into the crisp night air on the steps of the Met. A black, custom-built Bentley was waiting at the curb, its engine purring. Peterson held the door open. Damon helped her inside before sliding in beside her. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them off from the noise and the flashing lights. The car pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the chaos of the Gala behind them. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the soft hum of the engine as they glided through the streets of Manhattan. Emma stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, her reflection a ghostly image on the glass. Her hand was still clutching his. "You should have warned me," she finally said, her voice quiet. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I didn't decide until I saw Croft put his hands on you. After what Isabella and Richard had already done, I was going to wait. But they pushed it too far. They humiliated you, Emma. I wasn't going to let that stand." Tears she had refused to shed inside the museum now welled in her eyes. They weren't tears of sadness or humiliation anymore. They were tears of overwhelming relief, of shock, of a profound, bone-deep gratitude that left her shaking. "Why, though?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why like that? In front of everyone?" "Because they needed to see," he said, his voice laced with a cold anger. "People like them only understand one thing: power. To them, you were worthless because you had no perceived power. I had to correct their perception, drastically, so that no one will ever treat you that way again." He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "It's the truth, Emma," he murmured against her skin. And it was long past time the world knew it. The full weight of his words, of his actions, finally settled upon her. He hadn't just defended her, he had validated her. He had taken her broken narrative and rewritten it with thunder and lightning. He'd shown the world that her worth was not, and had never been, tied to Richard Sterling. It was tied to him, and now to herself. The Bentley moved silently through the city, a hermetically sealed bubble of peace gliding through the vibrant chaos of New York. Emma leaned her head back against the cool leather, her mind reeling, trying to connect the impossible events of the evening to the quiet, private life she had been living. To understand the thunderclap, she had to remember the rain. It had started 6 months ago, on a miserably wet Tuesday. Her divorce from Richard was final, the ink still feeling raw on the paper. She had just moved into a small but sunny apartment in Brooklyn, and her foundation was little more than a dream operating out of her spare bedroom. That afternoon, the server hosting her foundation's fledgling website had crashed. Panicked, she had called the tech support number for the hosting company, a small, unassuming subsidiary of a larger, faceless tech conglomerate. The man who answered had a calm, deep voice. He didn't sound like a typical call center employee. He introduced himself simply as Locke. He listened patiently to her frantic explanation, his silence oddly comforting. Instead of walking her through a script, he asked intelligent, insightful questions. Within 20 minutes, he had not only fixed the problem, but had also identified a vulnerability in her code and rewritten it for her, emailing her the patch. "You should be charging for this level of service," she had said, amazed. A low chuckle came through the line. "Consider it a donation. I like what you're trying to do. The art world needs more people who care about the artists, not just the price tags." Intrigued, she had looked up the hosting company. It was owned by a firm called Oak Haven Ventures, which was, in turn, a subsidiary of Lockhart Industries. A thrill of disbelief had shot through her. She called the number back. "Locke," she had said. "Is your first name by any chance Damon?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You're resourceful," he finally said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I was stress testing our new customer service AI integration, taking a few calls myself to see the system from the user's end." That was how it began, a random 1 in a billion tech support call. He was intrigued by her passion for her foundation. She was intrigued by the most powerful man in the tech world personally answering support tickets. He asked if he could buy her a coffee to discuss her foundation's security needs further. She agreed, half expecting a slick executive in a suit to show up. Instead, Damon Lockhart met her at a hole-in-the-wall coffee shop in her neighborhood, wearing jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled down low. He was quieter than she expected, more intense. His fame and wealth seemed like an ill-fitting coat he wore only when necessary. In person, he was just a man, a brilliant, watchful, and unexpectedly lonely man. They talked for 3 hours. She told him about her past, about Richard, not as a complaint, but as a statement of fact that had led her to where she was now. She spoke of her belief that art could heal, that it wasn't just a commodity for the rich. He listened with a focused stillness that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. He, in turn, told her about his own past, a childhood spent in foster care, a brilliant mind that found solace in code because it was logical and fair, unlike people. He spoke of building his empire not for the money, but for the control to never be powerless again. She saw the vulnerability beneath his formidable reputation. They were two lonely people who had been shaped by the wreckage of their past. Their coffee meeting turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks through Brooklyn Bridge Park at night, where they could talk without anyone recognizing him. Their romance was a whirlwind, conducted in secret. It was intense, profound, and utterly private. He was drawn to her resilience and the fact that she wanted nothing from him but his time and his thoughts. She was drawn to his hidden gentleness and the way he saw her. Emma Hayes, the art lover, the survivor, not the ex-Mrs. Sterling. 2 months into their relationship, he was finalizing the hostile takeover of Sterling and Finch, Richard's firm. It was a deal he had been working on for over a year. "I can't have this get out," he'd told her one night in his starkly minimalist penthouse overlooking Central Park. "Not yet. If Richard or his partners knew I was involved with you, they would use it. They'd scream conflict of interest, try to paint the acquisition as a personal vendetta. It would endanger the entire deal and put you in a horrific spotlight." She had agreed. She didn't want that spotlight anyway. Their private world was a sanctuary. A month later, he proposed. There was no grand gesture. They were in her small apartment, making pasta, covered in flour. He had simply stopped what he was doing, taken her hands in his and said, "I don't want to spend another day of my life without you being my wife." They were married a week later at City Hall with 2 of his most trusted employees as witnesses. Peterson was one of them. She wore a simple cream-colored dress. He wore a dark suit. They exchanged simple gold bands. He became her husband, and she became his, and the world remained completely unaware. Emma Lockhart. It felt right. It felt real. They had decided to wait until the Sterling and Finch acquisition was complete, and the dust had settled before making their marriage public. They lived a bifurcated life. To the world, he was the reclusive Damon Lockhart, and she was the struggling founder of a small arts foundation. In private, they were husband and wife, building a life together in the quiet moments the world didn't see. The invitation to the Met Gala had been a complication. Her foundation had received the grant, and it was expected that she attend. "You should go," Damon had insisted. "It's a huge night for your foundation. You earned this. I'll be there, but I'll stay in the background. No one will connect us." "What if I see Richard?" she had asked, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Damon's expression had hardened. "You hold your head high," he had said, his voice firm. "You are not the woman he left. You are my wife. Remember that, even if no one else knows it yet. You have nothing to be ashamed of." He had been right, but neither of them had anticipated the sheer, concentrated venom of Isabella's attack or the public, lecherous advance from Harrison Croft. Damon, watching from the balcony, had seen the plan to remain secret for what it was. A strategic decision that was now causing his wife immense pain. And in that moment, his strategy had changed. The billion-dollar deal became secondary. Protecting her, affirming her, became the only thing that mattered. His declaration on that stage wasn't just an announcement, it was a coronation. The Bentley pulled into the private garage beneath his penthouse. The engine cut off, plunging them into a profound silence. The events of the evening came rushing back to Emma, no longer a blurry dream, but a sharp, terrifying, exhilarating reality. She was Emma Lockhart, and the whole world knew it. They ascended in the private elevator, the silent, swift ride a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions swirling inside Emma. When the doors opened directly into the sprawling penthouse, the view of Central Park, a dark, sleeping giant glittering with the lights of the city, spread out before them. This was Damon's world, a fortress of solitude high above the noise. And now it was officially her world too. She walked towards the floor-to-ceiling windows, wrapping her arms around herself. Her reflection stared back at her, the woman in the sapphire dress, her face still pale with shock, her eyes wide with the enormity of it all. "The deal," she said quietly, turning to face him as he came to stand beside her. "Sterling and Finch, what about the deal?" "My legal team is already handling it," Damon said, his tone dismissing it as a minor concern. "They'll issue a statement clarifying the timeline of our relationship, making it clear it began long after the acquisition was set in motion. There will be noise, but it won't stop it. Richard Sterling was never important enough to stop me, Emma. He was just a bug on the windshield." The casual, ruthless way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. This was the other side of Damon Lockhart, the titan of industry who could crush his enemies without a second thought. And tonight, her enemies had become his. "They will be ruined, won't they?" she whispered, thinking of Richard's ashen face, of Isabella's mask of fury. "Their social standing?" "Yes," Damon stated without a hint of apology. Isabella's currency was her perceived status, which was tied to Richard's. Richard's career relied on his reputation and connections. By publicly humiliating my wife, they made themselves toxic assets. No one will touch them. No one will want to be their friend, and no one will want to do business with them. They authored their own destruction. I just provided the stage. There was a karmic finality to it that was both terrifying and, to a small, wounded part of her, deeply satisfying. They had tried to destroy her with whispers and social exclusion. Damon had destroyed them with a microphone and the simple, undeniable truth. He stepped closer, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. His gaze was intense, searching her face. "Was it too much, Emma? Was I wrong to do it that way?" She looked into his eyes, the gray depths that held both a fierce, protective fire and a quiet, profound vulnerability that only she was allowed to see. She thought of the suffocation she'd felt in that hall, the crushing weight of their judgment, the feeling of being utterly worthless and alone. And then she thought of the moment he'd said her name, the way the entire world had shifted to acknowledge her existence, her value. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You weren't wrong." A wave of emotion washed over her, and she stepped into his embrace, burying her face in the crisp fabric of his suit. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, his hand stroking her hair. She felt the solid, steady beat of his heart against her ear. Here in his arms, she was safe. She was home. "I love you," she murmured into his chest. "I love you, Emma Lockhart," he replied, his voice a low, possessive rumble. Never forget who you are. He tilted her chin up, and his lips met hers. The kiss was not frantic or desperate. It was a kiss of sealing, of promise. It was the end of their secret history and the beginning of their public future. When they broke apart, a wry smile touched her lips. Our lives are going to be very different tomorrow. They are, he agreed, his own smile mirroring hers. No more hiding, no more separate lives, just us. The sun would rise in a few hours. The gossip columns would be on fire. The financial news would explode. Their phones would ring off the hook. A storm was coming, but for the first time, Emma wasn't afraid. She wouldn't be facing it alone. She would be facing it beside her husband, the king who had stepped out of the shadows to claim his queen, not to give her his power, but to finally show the world the power she had possessed all along. That night, a ghost became a queen, and a whispered name became a roar. Emma's story is a powerful reminder that your worth is never determined by the people who discard you. True power doesn't come from a label on a dress or a name on a building. It comes from integrity, resilience, and the quiet strength to remain true to yourself when the world tries to tell you you're worthless. The people who judged Emma were blinded by the superficial, and in the end, their own world was shattered by a truth they were too arrogant to see. What did you think of Damon's epic reveal? Was it the perfect karmic justice for Richard and Isabella? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice, love, and unexpected triumphs. Thank you for listening.